I think that most people would agree that if you were to take that story as real, literal, whatever you want to say, that Jesus actually said those things, Jesus turns out in many ways to be a very scary person in the sense he's talking about determining the eternal destiny of every man, woman, and child that lives. Absolute morality does exist, that God is watching.
Yeah.
But along the way, you also have this tremendous message of forgiveness and love, but they go together, and you can't dictate. Talk to that.
Yeah. The problem is that so many people want a comfortable Jesus. They want a Jesus who doesn't ruffle their feathers, one that fits in with their political and social agenda. And so often you will find that the Jesus of history, reconstructed by skeptical critics, is a politically left, feminist, universal health care now sort of Jesus, whom they feel very, very comfortable with. And they're not allowing the Jesus of history to really be himself in all of his strangeness, in all of his discomforting and difficult sayings. We need to allow him to speak to us, even though it might make us feel uncomfortable. And when we do, I think we'll find a much more radical Jesus than the Jesus of the skeptical critics.
How about a loving Jesus?
I think that's certainly part of it, though that's the part that, in a sense, has been overemphasized in the past. The Jesus who taught the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, but they don't see the same Jesus who overturned the temples, or who overturned the tables in the temple, or pronounced the woes on the Pharisees. This is a Jesus who was loving and compassionate, but also a Jesus who was holy and uncompromising in his devotion to God the Father and the Father's program for human history.
I find it interesting that some of the folks that have the pride problem see Jesus as loving. Those that have a sin problem are afraid of Jesus and don't see the loving side. Give a word of hope to the folks that just feel that they could never be friends with Jesus.
Well, the remarkable thing about Jesus is that he associated himself with the downtrodden, the unclean, the diseased, the outcasts of Jewish society, people that were regarded as morally and ritually unclean by the religious people of that time. This is highly significant in more than one way. Jesus' table fellowship with prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners was a way of saying the kingdom of God is open to you, and you are welcome to come into it, to sit at table with me and fellowship in the kingdom of God. But it was also an even deeper and more radical claim than that, because you see, by associating with such people, normally religious folk would have thought that Jesus made himself unclean. But in Jesus' eyes, it was just the opposite. Through contact with him, they were made clean, so that it was his cleansing and forgiveness that was imparted to them rather than their contamination to him. In other words, it was a kind of oblique way of asserting, again, his divine status, to forgive sins and to welcome sinners into the kingdom of God. And so this, I think, can be a tremendous encouragement to folks who just don't feel good enough. It was for that kind of person that Jesus came. I love his saying that those who are well do not need a physician, but those who are sick.